Can Monero be traced? Yes. Can Zcash be traced? Yes. Can anything be traced? Yes. Like there is not a perfect solution for privacy. And Monero is not a perfect solution. But I mean, one of the things that drew me into the Monero community is that we're honest and upfront about the potential issues within Monero, about the threat models that could be at risk within Monero. And I mean, if we look at, like you were talking about the Andy Greenberg stuff, I mean, if you look back at what he mentioned with the Bitfinex hack, there's no evidence that there was Monero tracing involved there at all.
This week on Monero Talk is sponsored by Cake Wallet. Store, send, receive, and exchange your Monero and Bitcoin safely on iOS and Android too. Cake Wallet is open source, and you always control your own keys. And by StealthEX, an instant exchange where privacy is the top concern. Go to stealthex.io to instantly exchange between Monero and 450 plus assets without having to create an account or register, and with no limits, making StealthEX a simple way to purchase Monero with crypto anonymously. Monero Talk is also made possible from contributions by viewers and listeners like you. And supporting us is easier than ever. By typing in monerotalk.crypto in your monero.com or Cake Wallet send address field to send us a tip. This week on Monero Talk, Douglas Tuman interviews SethForPrivacy, a privacy advocate and host of Opt Out podcast. The two discuss what Seth has been up to lately with his work at Foundation Devices, XMR hardware wallets, his take on Andy Greenberg's suggestion that Monero can be traced, Monero and Zcash's susceptibility to advanced targeted attacks versus thwarting general surveillance, Zcash versus Monero, DevTax, the implementation of a trustless ZK snark approach, and a unifying Q&A Twitter Spaces with Monero and Zcash community members that goes into further detail of the discussed strengths and weaknesses of the two projects. Monero Talk starts now.
All right, Seth, welcome to Monero Talk.
First time caller. It's good to be here.
We're certainly not a stranger of Monero Talk. How's it going, man? You have been a little bit of a stranger to Monero, though. I don't know. You've been lurking in other communities or hanging out in other communities. Obviously, you've been missed. I haven't seen you saying as many Monero things, or maybe I just have been missing them. I don't know. No,
it's definitely true. I've just been really, really busy over the last year with personal stuff and new job and a lot of things going on. So Monero has taken a little bit of a back burner for me. Not because I've lost kind of faith in it or anything like that. Certainly nothing like that, but just kind of shifted priorities a little bit, and especially with new job being focused on Bitcoin first. That's been more of a focus for me in research and discussions with other people and that sort of thing. So I've shifted a bit more to the Bitcoin side of things, but still keeping up with Monero. I've been watching GitHub and shipping updates in the Monero packages that I release, and keep my guides up to date and stuff like that. Just kind of a little bit more behind the scenes on the Monero side of things.
Awesome. What is the new job? What is it?
Yeah, so I took over as head of content for Foundation Devices in October. So a few months now, basically creating educational content for them, helping them to spin up a podcast, blog posts, doing a lot of marketing, kind of business development work with them as well. But ultimately, at Foundation, we're trying to build a set of tools that help to empower people to reclaim their digital sovereignty. So that started with Bitcoin, but that's not our only focus. Our focus will be a lot more broad than that. And you know me, that I have a really big focus on self-hosting, on privacy, on self-sovereignty. So all of that really aligns with what we're doing at Foundation. But right now,
Bitcoin is found the right guy, huh?
It's been a good pairing so far. It's been really, really, really good.
Who else is on this team? Have they been around for a while, or?
Yeah. So the company was founded in the beginning of 2020. So they've been around since then. US based. Boston is where the headquarters are at. We don't actually have an office. We're remote only, but Boston's where our headquarters are. They launched their first Bitcoin hardware wallet shortly after And then we just launched our kind of second edition called the Batch 2 sometimes of Passport, which is our Bitcoin hardware wallet, the beginning of 2022. So we've been around in the space for a while. Like I said, I just joined in October, but company's been around since 2020. I guess one other big name that people would know who's on the foundation team is Bitcoin Q&A, who's been a staunch privacy advocate and a really, really important educator in the Bitcoin space with a focus on privacy specifically. So almost all of like the really good privacy content around Bitcoin was created by him. So I think especially if anyone's in like kind of the Samurai Wallet crowd, they'll know Bitcoin Q&A because he hangs around those parts. So he's probably the main one that people would know in like the Monero and Bitcoin communities. But we've been growing the team a good bit the past few months. So it's been good to see us kind of spread our wings a little bit. But yeah.
Privacy's in, man. Privacy's in. You're
Mm-hmm.
you're leading the wave. What kind of tools and things do they have? Okay, you said that they have a hardware wallet. What else are they working on?
Yeah, so right now our main focus has been Bitcoin, like I mentioned a little bit before. So trying to get the financial sovereignty piece down and trying to do that in a way that enables people to gain privacy as well. So we worked hard even early on at implementing tools like Whirlpool directly into Passport, which is our Bitcoin hardware wallet. So you can easily mix Bitcoin directly to your hardware wallet. It connects to all kind of the best Bitcoin wallets, like Sparrow Wallet is always the one that I recommend. And we have really neat integration there. Right now, our only product is a Bitcoin hardware wallet.
Okay.
But that really is just the launching pad for us. We like to keep our cards a little close to our chest with what we're working on next. But rest assured, there's really exciting things. And I wouldn't have joined the team if we were only focused on Bitcoin hardware wallets. But there's a much broader focus on digital sovereignty that is exciting. And I think there's not only a massive need for it, but there's also a massive market niche that isn't being hit there that I think we can do in a way that's very approachable. Because I mean, the reason why I have loved Monero so much is that it makes privacy approachable for everyone. It makes it where anyone can pick up a Monero wallet and gain strong financial privacy. So that ability for someone who's not technical to be able to gain financial privacy, to be able to gain broader privacy, self-sovereignty are really, really important to me. And that's really where our focus is, so that it's not just the kind of the techno elite that are getting the ability to opt out. But really it's anyone who makes that decision, no matter their kind of technical acumen.
Yeah, the vision. I love the vision that they have. I'm very curious what these other tools are that you guys are working on. It's gonna exciting.
The only thing I'll tease is just that we're Bitcoin centric. We're very particular in our wording.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Hey, so
from there.
You're adding Monero to the hardware wallet. You're saying it here first. It's going down. You're making that announcement.
I won't officially say that for sure.
Is that something that there's no real technical difficulty with doing something like that?
Yeah, I mentioned it on Twitter that as far as I know, you could create a firmware for our Bitcoin hardware wallet that was Monero specific. You couldn't probably do both just because of hardware constraints. But as far as I know, and from brief discussions with the team, someone could just pick up the firmware, modify it for Monero use. There would definitely be some pretty major modifications necessary, but you could ship firmware that would be Monero specific on our current hardware wallet today. And that's something where, like I've mentioned, if someone put forward a CCS for that, like I would fund the hell out of that. I would love to be able to, I'd have a second passport for sure to be able to use with Monero. Cause right now the hardware wallet options for Monero are kind of pitiful.
Yeah. I'd get one, but put me on that list.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. I mean, we've had tons of people reply to our Twitter, and I think there's a real need there for Monero. So it's something we're aware of.
Yeah, like what is the best option for hardware wallets for Monero right now? There's really no like great, super easy, built for Monero option.
Yeah, I think really Trezor is probably the best. With the caveats that Trezor doesn't have a secure element, so they have some physical security issues. So someone got your Trezor wallet and you don't have a passphrase on your Monero wallet, they could relatively trivially steal funds. So it's still better in that a remote attack, like someone having malware on your computer or something, they couldn't steal your Monero when you're using it that way. But if someone physically got access to the device, there's problems. But Trezor is open source hardware, open source software. It's all verifiable. They've been really, really good at staying on top of their updates for the Monero code base as well. They have some good people working there on the Monero app specifically for Trezor. They haven't integrated directly into their I think Trezor Live is the name of their wallet suite, but that's good anyways, because that means that you're not using their remote node and trusting their software. Just use it with Feather Wallet or Monero GUI or really whatever Monero wallet you want to use there. So I think that's probably the best option. I mean, for many people, I think right now the best option is just not to use a hardware wallet and just have separate cold storage that you keep the seed words for and have a hot wallet and transfer into it when you need to. But I think Trezor is the best option right now.
Yeah, I don't even do the hardware wallet thing, because it hasn't been. But if this new one comes out, yeah, I've been waiting for somebody to get it right. What's the feel among the team members with regards to Monero? Is it? I know you said you're obviously Bitcoin centric. Mm-hmm. You're obviously friendly to Monero. Is everybody else friendly to Monero, or is there a debate among the group there?
I mean, I think I think we've talked about it. I know I've talked about it with other people, but kind of a litmus test for me on how intellectually honest a Bitcoiner is if they are at least okay with Monero, understand the use case. If they don't choose to use it, that's totally fine. But that's kind of my litmus test for Bitcoiners. And as far as I know, everyone on the team at the very least understands Monero, understands its use case, and sees the use for it. I don't want to speak too much for people on the team, but there's definitely an appreciation for what Monero does and the value that it brings to the table and the usefulness of it. Obviously, we're choosing to focus on Bitcoin first because I think this is something that I'm kind of coming to grips with a little bit too, and that just that network effect that is behind Bitcoin is important. So if people are going to come into Bitcoin, we want them to be able to do it in a way that is privacy preserving, that is actually self-sovereign, where they're holding their own keys, they're running their own node, all of that fun stuff. So that's definitely the focus for us, but I think there's definitely an appreciation for Monero broadly across the team.
It's good to hear. Refreshing.
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I wouldn't go somewhere when everyone were Monero haters, or if everyone was talking about shit coins and using that language like that. That wouldn't be the place for me. So
yeah,
if I'm going somewhere, it's going to be somewhere that's very very intellectually honest.
It was a good, as soon as I saw that, it was like a good sign for that company, right? They got Seth on board. That's good. Yeah, man. I mean, that kind of segues into the Zcash Monero discussion, right? There's some similar larger arguments that kind of basically just right, the network effect. Monero's got the network effect, arguably, in the privacy coin space. Mm-hmm. But yeah, let's. I wanted to have you on because I don't know if you seen all the FUD, or you've been in your own little world. I don't know. You probably haven't even.
I haven't. If it's been recent, no, I must have missed it. I haven't really even been browsing Twitter for the past couple of weeks, at least.
Oh wow!
So, yeah, if it's been happening there, then I've missed it all entirely and stayed happy and healthy. So.
Yeah, I don't want to ruin your. I feel like I'm ruining your good mood here.
Burn the house down. I want to hear what's been happening.
Well, it's nothing new. It's like a repeat of the same stuff. But Andy Greenberg, you're familiar with him, right? In some of his work, yeah. Right? He's old school crypto journalist. Mm-hmm. He recently published. Are you familiar with the book he recently published?
I'm not. No, I know of it, but I haven't read it or anything like that.
Yeah, he recently published a book on the traceability of Bitcoin, essentially, and how, or crypto in general, right? Mm-hmm. On how chain analytics companies have the ability to trace crypto, and it's being used by governments to, for example, to track down criminals. And then he recently did an interview with, I forget her name, Laura
Shin.
Laura Shin, yeah. Mm-hmm. What is her podcast? Unchained, which is a very large podcast, been around, also very well respected crypto journalist. And in that podcast, they basically, talked about his book, but the highlight of the podcast is where he's basically saying that it seems like there's very good evidence He's like, I'm just going to go out and say it. Monero can be traced by chain analytics companies. So that was like the bomb that was dropped, which he's said it in the past, I think in his Wired article from like a year ago. But it was just like seeing it out there again, and Laura's like, oh really? And like she puts out like a short little, video that basically highlights that aspect of the video. So it was like a bomb was dropped. I responded, typical responses, but it led to Zuko like blocking me on Twitter and the Zcash community account, which I don't know who's running that, but I gotta say they're doing a horrible job. Not even for their own purposes. It's not a good look. They came out, like they tweeted that I'm an end, because I was like, come on the podcast, let's talk about it. They're like, we don't associate with enemies or something. It's basically like what they were saying. Like, wow. So that like all this happened, but basically the FUD is the same old FUD. It's that Monero is traceable. So I just want to kind of like go over that, like some of the things that he brought up. He brought up this presentation that was at a conference in Italy. So I don't know if you remember that slide that leaked. Yeah. It was like a chain analysis or elliptic slide. I forget what company leaked it, but it basically suggested that they're capable of tracing Monero. And he also strongly references that IRS document that was used in the Bitfinex hack. And he, from those things, he's saying, there's very strong evidence that Monero is in fact being traced. So what is your kind of short response at first to how traceable is Monero?
Yeah, I mean, short responses here are the tricky part. And I think the reason why we get in these discussions with people like Zuko and people like Andy is that normally they try to condense the entirety of privacy down into a very finite box, both because it's catchy and because it's a lot easier for the kind of the layman to understand. If you just say Monero can be traced, Zcash can't, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of Zuko's point, is normally that decoy's bad, encryption good.
Ignoring all other aspects of the project, all other concepts involved in a cryptocurrency, just looking at one particular element.
Yeah. And so I think if you want to shorten it down to one word answer, can Monero be traced? Yes. Can Zcash be traced? Yes. Can anything be traced? Yes. Like there is not a perfect solution for privacy. And Monero is not a perfect solution. But I mean, one of the things that drew me into the Monero community is that we're honest and upfront about the potential issues within Monero, about the threat models that could be at risk within Monero. And I mean, if we look at, like you were talking about the Andy Greenberg stuff, I mean, if you look back at what he mentioned with the Bitfinex hack, there's no evidence that there was Monero tracing involved there at all. There's a long thread where Fluffy Pony kind of dove into the details of the release, and it's very clear that the way that they traced them was that they traced Bitcoin deposits to the same accounts where Monero was deposited, and they traced the Bitcoin side of things all the way through. There's no evidence in that document that there was any Monero tracing that happened there. They just figured out that the accounts using Bitcoin saw that there was also Monero deposited to those accounts, and then traced the Bitcoin out of it.
Yeah, Fluffy like very thoroughly went over this with Andy Greenberg, and then a year later, it's like completely forgotten, and he's out there on Laura's podcast being like.
And I'm assuming Andy didn't bring up any other evidence for tracing Monero. I'm assuming there was no other mention. I didn't have a chance to actually watch the podcast.
No, those are the things that he referenced in this podcast as to how he's kind of concluding that Monero can be traced. And then, so then I pushed him. I wanted him to come on the podcast. He was like kind of thinking about it, but then after I made some tweet, he's like, no, I don't think I'm going to come on now because whatever, your tweet. And then I think I reconvinced him to maybe he's thinking about it, but probably now after this podcast, he's not going to want to do it. But yeah, those are the only two things he was really pointing to. And, he wrote this book and he wrote this article, and the article, basically that's all the article. Oh no, the third thing it points to in the article is the paper from 2017.
Yeah.
But the thing he's using as his strongest evidence is that IRS document. He seems
and I mean, there's like, I understand the reasoning for that because that's the only case that has Monero involved where the people were arrested and it wasn't clearly stated that they were arrested for other reasons. Like even if you look at Bitcoin is obviously completely traceable. Almost always there's not a proper use of privacy tools when these criminal cases are involved. But usually it's not even the Bitcoin that gets people in trouble. It's usually just kind of regular OPSEC issues that gets people arrested and causes problems. And this one, it actually was Bitcoin tracing that got these people caught. And there's this very vague mention of Monero. And then there's one hop that they talk about that's not really clear what happened there. But like I said, like Fluffy Pony walks through what is actually happening there. It's very clear that it was Bitcoin being traced. But I understand that that's like, it's a high profile case where Monero is mentioned. So I understand wanting to use that. I think the only really interesting piece of information we've seen was that slide by Italian law enforcement where they talked about that. I can't remember what the percentage, but they said a certain percentage of cases
or something.
Yeah, but it was that 80% of cases involving Monero could be solved. Not that 80% of transactions in Monero were traced. And I mean, even the Bitfinex example is a great example of a case involving Monero that was solved not because of Monero. It's very, very rare that Monero was used in a vacuum because even right now, when we talk about darknet markets, most of them are still Bitcoin and Monero. They're not Monero exclusively. So there's usually the Bitcoin side, and that's usually how people get pwned. So I understand wanting to approach it from that angle, but even then, even if you were to somehow think that the Bitfinex hack involved Monero being traced, there's no evidence of how they did that. And there's very, very clear evidence in that document for how they traced the actual Bitcoin transactions, which I think also should be telling.
Yeah. So what do you think's up with that then? So, I mean, is Andy, why at that moment is he not like, yeah, I didn't mean to say Monero can be traced. I guess he does kind of back up on that. And he says, look at my article where I say it could be other things. So I'll give him that. But if you watch the video, it's like he literally said Monero. I don't even want to say it. Like he literally qualified it with, I probably shouldn't even be saying this, but Monero is I've determined that Monero can be traced based on, the evidence that I've seen.
But I mean, I don't want to assume motives because I wouldn't want to assume that it's malicious or anything like that. But it is definitely odd that it seems like Fluffy Bunny did a really good job breaking down why the Bitfinex hack in particular wasn't Monero related. And obviously still stuck with that. I mean, it is catchy to say that Monero can be traced when it's the one thing that we have no evidence for it being traced. So it's a good soundbite. But I definitely don't want to kind of assume motive there or speak to why he did that. I'd love to chat with him about that or to hear you chat with him about it, because I think it'd be good to flesh out the reasons why he still believes that, despite the response by Fluffy Pony, despite other evidence. So I would be curious to hear his viewpoint and don't want to assume motive or anything like that until I could hear more from him.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to ask him, but I don't think, maybe he'll come on. I mean, so what would you say to like a Zcash or maybe somebody who's not hasn't been in it for too long, kind of just got into crypto, wanted to find a privacy coin, but is kind of comparing Monero to Zcash, is leaning towards the Zcash side, and is using this point to kind of really make their decision on why they're choosing Zcash because they think Monero's privacy is broken. Like, what would your, in a non-shilly way, because I just feel like the information isn't getting out to this group of people that are, perhaps maybe wrongfully choosing Zcash because of this FUD.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are always going to be biased by their bags. So a lot of times if people just think that Zcash will do better, they'll choose to ignore the nuances of privacy in order to support the bags that are involved. I mean, I think Monero people do the same thing. And sometimes we can kind of blindly back up Monero even when there are potential issues or flaws because we have a vested interest in it. So it's something we all have to be careful of. But I think that's a piece of it. The main thing I would say is that there is absolutely no evidence of widespread traceability for Monero. There's no technical evidence for that in all of the research that's been done on Monero, which there has been a lot of research, both internal and external to the Monero community, on trying to trace Monero. There's no evidence of broad traceability. There have been, like you mentioned, there's a really old like 2017 article that did some tracing on Monero, which was far, far back in the past when the actual privacy protocol was much more in its infancy and was not nearly as complex or nuanced as it is today, not as powerful as it is today. But there's not current evidence even of specific cases of Monero being traced in targeted cases, which if we want to break down Monero's privacy, a lot of the way that I talk about it is I talk about that it provides privacy from dragnet surveillance.
Right, from surveillance.
Almost perfectly. Like that is the beautiful part of Monero, is that if someone's just trying to collect data on all Monero users, they can't. It's basically impossible. They can't statistically trace through transactions without tons of external data. There's not a way to do that. And that really is the place where most people benefit the most from financial privacy. Most people are not going to be targeted by law enforcement, by governments, by criminals. They're not going to be attacked by these very targeted, specific attacks that could be done against Monero. They're really just trying to gain some privacy so that they can choose what they want to reveal, what they don't want to reveal, and they can spend their money how they want to. For that, Monero is perfect. It works great, better than Zcash in many ways because there's such a broad crowd to hide in. So you have a lot more transactions to hide in. You have a lot more users using exchanges, a lot more nodes on the network. There are a lot of benefits to the broad network effect that Monero has. Where Monero is not perfect, but is almost always good enough, is even under targeted surveillance. And targeted surveillance is like this very advanced threat model where, take the Bitfinex hackers, for example. They stole billions of dollars in Bitcoin and they tried to get away with it. That is a very advanced threat model because they have the FBI, they have multiple governments, they have lots of people trying to target them specifically and surveil them specifically. So in that case, there are things that could be done on the Monero side that could provide some increased probability of guessing correctly on their transactions. But that also involves the person who's targeting you being on both sides of the transaction. So like they have to have sent you Monero and then received that same Monero output from you again, which is all chance. And if you have a wallet with lots of outputs, they may never get that output again. There are ways to protect yourself against that, which there's not kind of a clearly laid out approach, but generally sending funds back to yourself multiple times with random time intervals between will prevent that kind of guess from being 100% accurate, and will allow you to, again, hide in the crowd that's provided by Monero's ring signatures. But even in those targeted threat models, we have zero known cases of law enforcement or a government or anyone like that being able to trace through Monero, which, especially as Monero's usage has grown on darknet markets and in ransomware, I would expect to have seen that by now. So the two assumptions you can make are either Monero can't reliably be traced, even in a targeted, very advanced threat model situation, or Monero can be traced and they're all keeping it perfectly quiet and hiding it from legal documents, from court documents, etc., in order to keep that capability under wraps, which is possible. And that's kind of the tinfoil hat approach to why there have been no cases. But I think the more realistic answer is that even in these very advanced threat models, even in the Bitfinex hack, which did involve Monero, there's a lot of Monero used in their attempts to evade the police. There's no evidence of Monero being traced. And I think that's a good example of how, even though there are technical ways that the ring signature approach in Monero can break down under very targeted surveillance, it hasn't actually happened in the real world because it's so specific and so hard to actually pull off that type of attack against a specific individual.
Yeah, it's like cash, right? I mean, cash, if you're being pinpointed, if the government's coming after you, the privacy that cash offers may break down as well, right? And I mean, you could say, you could equally say the same thing for Zcash, right? I mean, is Zcash resistant to targeted, attacks?
I mean, if used properly,
Zcash user,
if you're only in Z addresses, if you're only using Zcash in the proper way, if you are running your own node and not using a light wallet, which is the common approach to Zcash usage on mobile and others, then yes, I would say Zcash is very resistant to even targeted attacks. And this is what Zuko talks about every time he gets the chance: is ring signatures bad, encryption and zero knowledge proofs good, which doesn't tell the whole story because Monero uses encryption just like Zcash does. Monero uses zero knowledge proofs in a similar way that Zcash does. The difference is that with Monero, we use this thing called ring signatures, which anyone who's familiar with Monero knows this. I'll explain it really simply just for anyone who isn't. But that means that your output when you go to spend is one of 16 potential outputs. And the recipient doesn't know which of those 16 is the true output. And no one else on the network knows which of those is the true output. The recipient does. No one else on the network knows which of those is the true output. So you gain strong anonymity. You hide in that crowd of 16, and each of those 16 outputs has its own history that has 16 outputs before that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Quickly branches into something that's practically impossible to trace through. In Zcash, you don't have ring signatures. You have something that's called a complete anonymity set, which basically your transaction could be any transaction within that Zcash pool. So that's whatever the current protocol of Zcash is, your transaction, the outputs in it could have been any one of the outputs that were part of that pool anytime from when it started until now. And there's no way to gauge precisely which one that is. Again, that's only if you're properly using Z addresses only. If you're properly sending Z to Z only, then you do gain those privacy guarantees. And I mean, this very simple, and again, this only really matters for this very, very targeted attack, but it is helpful there to take the approach that Zcash has taken. And this is the reason why I've been one of the people kind of pushing for the implementation or the exploration of, sorry, just a second, my phone is freaking out now and sending Twitter Space audio through. This is one of the reasons why I've kind of pushed in the Monero community for us to explore implementing a trustless ZK snark approach to that membership proof, which basically what I would love to see is that we implement Seraphis. Seraphis allows us to have much better modularity. The ability to upgrade specific pieces of the protocol becomes much easier. And then we're able to implement this trustless ZK snark piece for just replacing the ring signature portion of the Monero protocol. And that would continue to provide all of the other guarantees that Monero has, where stealth addresses hide the recipient of transactions.
For encryption, right? So
yeah,
Monero does use encryption.
It is encryption amounts, which also use encryption, and zero knowledge proofs right now. We hide those amounts. That would continue. Then we just replace the ring membership piece with the trustless ZK snark approach that Zcash uses. And in my eyes, that would make Monero the perfect protocol against every attack. And it would be far and above superior to everything, even Zcash on a technical level, because you'd have such a broader anonymity set to hide in because there's so many more Monero users than there are Zcash users. So there's a reason I've been pushing that. It's been awesome to see some really, really good traction behind that GitHub issue over the past few weeks. So it's definitely something where I'm optimistic that will actually happen. And that will, I mean, again, like I said, there are zero real world examples of even a targeted attack working against a Monero user. But that will even better protect those targeted users. And again, I'm not doing this because I want to see criminals succeed, but because I want, in an adversarial environment, us to be able to have privacy, even if a government were to target us for being a Monero user or holder, or because we're of a race or religion or something else that's being attacked by a government. I want Monero to protect you, even if they know that you are a Monero user and they want to try to use Monero to trace things that you do with it. So that's why I'd love to see that. I think it's something we'll see in the Monero protocol in the next 5-6 years, hopefully. And that would mainly just erase the last piece of FUD that's possible against the Monero privacy protocol, but also in reality would provide some stronger protections for these very advanced threat models.
Do you love coffee and Monero as much as we do? Consider making gratuitous.org your daily cup. Pay with Monero for premium fresh beans, and if you like what you taste, send a digital cash tip directly to the Guatemalan farmers that made it possible. Proceeds help us grow this channel, Gratuitous, and Monero.
Yeah, it seems like because Monero isn't perfect today in this one way, that it's critically flawed, which doesn't make any sense. Because I mean, Zcash, it's changed, it's evolved over time, it's become better. So was it critically flawed at some point when it had its trusted setup? So like, why is it no longer flawed now? Right? Because according to their definition, once something is right, like, so I mean, and arguably that's much worse than what we're dealing with, right? Because it's
I mean, and the rampant use of T addresses, which are totally transparent and provide no privacy. That was the vast majority of network usage until the most recent upgrade. Even now, there's still T address usage. It's lower than before, but yeah, it's certainly. I mean, it's throwing stones from a glass house, and it's frustrating because we really should be on the same side. We should be able to work together towards protecting users' privacy, to aid each other in research, to aid each other in cryptographic techniques, for helping each other with the ways that we build privacy protocols, the way that we protect our users. And there really should be a camaraderie there. But again, I think it's the financial side of these things that just blinds people and makes people want to be tribalistic rather than kind of uniting for a common good. And that's definitely not to say that every Zcash user is bad or hates Monero or anything like that. But there's definitely a kind of a broad sentiment that's, I think, problematic within their community, unfortunately. And I've had quite a few interactions with their community, with Zuko. But yeah, it's tricky and it's frustrating because Monero is an immensely powerful tool for privacy and for freedom, and it is providing privacy and freedom to far, far more users than Zcash or any other cryptocurrency today, more than even Bitcoin in a financial privacy sense. So it really should be recognized for that. The obvious ability for the Monero community to come together to upgrade the network and improve over time has been proven since the beginning of Monero. That's always been the goal. Like, there are so many reasons to believe that even if this is a flaw with Monero, and I think it is a flaw, but not a fatal one, and not one that affects most people, and maybe even affects no one because there's no real world cases of this tracing being done, it's still something that I'd love to see us fix. And I 100% have faith that the Monero community, the brilliant researchers, the brilliant developers will fix this one last flaw. And at that point, Monero's privacy protocol will be practically perfect from a cryptography standpoint.
Right. And it did it in a responsible way, using the technology it had at the time that was properly vetted, and implemented it in a trustless way. And now that new technology is evolving, Monero is looking to implement it. And it's done it before, right? It took confidential transactions from Bitcoin devs, right? And this is, I think, one of the major strengths of Monero, the Monero project, is its ability to evolve, but yet stick to its core ethos as it does it.
Yeah, and do so in a way that doesn't sacrifice decentralization, that doesn't sacrifice trust. So we want to maximize privacy for the user without sacrificing those things. And like you said, that's why we haven't jumped on this ZK snark train, because there were massive sacrifices that you had to make, both in decentralization, because nodes would be much harder to run, in scaling and light wallet usage. And then the trust factor was big until this latest upgrade for Zcash, in that you had to believe that this trusted setup was done properly, or else funds could be minted infinitely. So it's very much like we're not just blind in the Monero community. Like we understand the advances that are happening. We have absolutely brilliant researchers working on Monero, and we know what's going on out in the space. We know that there are advantages to ZK snarks in a very specific way, but we're not going to implement them both before it's ready broadly and before it's ready for Monero. So we're not going to rush into that. We, I think, have struck the perfect middle ground between the ossification of Bitcoin and the willingness to just rapidly iterate and potentially harm users of something like a Zcash or Ethereum or those sorts of things, where we're cautiously optimistic about the way that we upgrade the network. And we do so in a very, very smart, slow way that continues to provide all of the things that users need, but we don't rush to do things in a way that will open us up to a kind of a world of potential harm for users, for the network, et cetera.
Yeah, by the way, not to go off topic, but I know you'll be at Monerotopia. I don't know where your talk's going to be on, but in addition to that, I would love for you to maybe host the panel with all the devs, and I want to be basically a panel on the future of Monero's technology, right? Talking about all these ways in which Monero is thinking about it evolving. It'd be great if you were the host of that. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I certainly hope to be able to. I'm still trying to 100% nail down that I can come in person. I really do want to.
Oh shit! Really? So, we're not nailed down yet. Oh no!
Yeah, I thought so. I'm just trying to work out
right now.
Everything with conferences this year because I have some for work as well.
There, man. So. I want you running that panel.
I know. I'm hoping to.
We'll have Luke on it. We'll have Justin Berman.
Nice.
We'll have Co on the panel. It would just be cool to openly have the devs talking about like this topic, for example. The decoys, ring signatures, using Zcash's tech to do it. Like I want to see that convo take place. Yeah. I know that it's happening in the forums, but it'd be cool to witness it.
Yeah, I'm certainly hoping to make it down in person. I really, really want to be there.
Anything we can do, let us know. Yeah, I was just thinking too, like, and I don't want to make this, a anti Zcash thing in any way, but that tweet that Zuko had sent years ago, where he basically said, Zcash is as private as we need it to be, essentially, to preserve our liberty and to use digital cash. But in those instances where we need to know who's doing what, is basically like he very like, was that what was he getting at with that? Because I mean, that seems to go right to the heart of what you were saying earlier, right? Like, yeah, you're not trying to protect criminals, but you realize for this thing to be resistant to state level attacks, and for it to actually exist without being co-opted or controlled or in any way, it's going to have to work under all conditions and for anybody, the criminals and the non-criminals alike. Do you think he's like changed his thinking on that, or when he said that, it's not what this is something I would love to, talk to him about if he ever interviewed, but what do you?
I think he didn't mean it in the way that he wrote it, but I think a lot of times he shouldn't be on Twitter. No offense. I really appreciate all that he's done for the privacy space, for the cryptography space. Absolutely brilliant person. But there's just a lot of stuff that happens on Twitter that I don't think is helpful for him or Zcash. And that was one of those instances of him saying they could make Zcash perfectly private, but also traceable for criminals as well, which isn't how privacy works. And he knows that. Like, I think it was just a kind of a wires getting crossed thing. So he understands that about privacy. And I think that's why Zcash has continued to iterate into a model where hopefully long term there will be no way to use transparent addresses on Zcash, and it'll be Z to Z only. I do think that that's their goal. I think they could have gotten there a long time ago, but some other motivations have stopped that. But I certainly don't think that he wants to build a tool that has a backdoor or anything like that. Like that's not his intent. And
I'd love to talk to him about it. Yeah, clear the air on that. And then, so what is the hesitation? I mean, with the addresses, it's just so they could, so exchanges can easily add them, right? They don't want to, but isn't that kind of like bending the knee to regulators and stuff? I mean, so isn't that?
Yeah,
are they saying that? I mean, I'm sure when we go into the when we go into the Q&A, if there's Zcashers out there, they could maybe better explain this. But is it that the entire community is on board with this idea of deprecating the transparent addresses and moving over to Z addresses, or is there like a debate there and people want to keep it for purposes of being able to, easily be a part of the traditional system, KYC system?
No, I mean, I think there's only two potential motivations. It's either that you want to be able to pitch Zcash as okay to regulators, or you want to be able to more easily enable exchanges and hardware wallets to implement Zcash. But the problem with both is, obviously, I think if you're doing it to bend the knee to regulators, that's a garbage reason. And you should feel very bad about yourself if that's why you are sacrificing the privacy of users. I don't think that that's the reason. for Zuko or other people in the Zcash team, even though they try to use that regulatory angle sometimes in their marketing and other stuff. I think the real reason is that if they went Z to Z only, it would make the life of exchanges and hardware wallet providers more difficult, because the approach taken in Zcash is much more computationally intensive. So it's quite possible that current hardware wallets couldn't actually do Z to Z only Zcash, so they wouldn't support it. And exchanges couldn't as easily support Zcash because it's much more resource intensive to run nodes and process those transactions. That's one of the reasons why Monero has not implemented their specific approach to the membership proof, why we've kept ring signatures, is because they're way more efficient than Zcash transactions. They allow us to build more efficient, more easy to verify transactions, which is really important for decentralization. We're not sacrificing users' privacy by going transparent or anything like that, but we're just using something that still provides really, really good protection against dragnet surveillance and good enough protection against targeted surveillance in order to not sacrifice users' privacy, but also still have decentralization. Obviously, we're not doing it so that exchanges and hardware wallets support Monero. I think that's a nice bonus, but we're doing it so that people can easily run nodes, that people can easily use mobile wallets, etc. And that's one of the reasons why we've waited on implementing things like Zcash's approach until it becomes efficient enough to be worth it. But yeah, I think the Zcash reasoning that I've heard is that it's to placate exchanges so that they'll continue supporting it, and to placate hardware wallets so that the kind of crappy hardware wallets that are out there today can support Zcash as is. But remember that means that everyone who's using exchanges and using hardware wallets is necessarily using the transparent portion of Zcash, which provides zero privacy and is worse than Bitcoin because there's no other privacy tools on top of Bitcoin, and there are far less users. So you are necessarily sacrificing your users' privacy and harming the privacy of the network as a whole in order to placate exchanges and hardware wallets, which in my opinion is a very bad idea. I've had lots of discussions with Zcash people about that and explained my reasoning in detail, but that hasn't obviously changed things. I think they've made some good changes in trying to make Z to Z only more of the default, just from a client perspective, where wallets try to do things in a more privacy preserving way with their most recent update. And I applaud that. I think that's been a great change and makes Zcash at least a usable privacy tool. But as long as you're wanting to kind of bend the knee to exchanges and keep one foot in the legacy system and one foot in the new system, you're going to keep sacrificing user privacy as a result, which is unfortunate. And again, I mean, like, I don't hate Zcash. I think from a technical perspective, it's interesting. From a privacy perspective, it's very, very interesting. But the issues like this cause a lot of problems and make it very hard to recommend as just a privacy tool for a privacy advocate. And that's where things get sad, because I would love to. I mean, obviously I love Monero, but I'd love to be able to say, like, if for some reason you can't get Monero, Zcash is a good tool as well. But I still can't really say that about Zcash.
Damn, man, you went harder than I would.
Like, it hurts me because I want Zcash to succeed purely because I want even the users of Zcash who somehow don't come across Monero or don't choose to use it to gain financial privacy and to gain financial sovereignty. Like, I'm not in this for Monero to win, for there to be one private money. I don't really care. I mean, obviously I would love for Monero to win just because of all of the hard work that's gone into it from so many brilliant people over the years. But it's something where I would love, just as a privacy advocate, to be able to say, you're using Zcash, like, awesome. You're getting really good privacy. You're winning in the financial privacy sense. Even if you look at like the monetary economics and other stuff with Zcash, I don't like, but just from a privacy perspective, I'd love to be able to say that. And they're getting closer, but I would love to see them fully commit to Z to Z only for the sake of their users, to ensure that if anyone's using Zcash, they are gaining privacy. Because right now it's still a blurry line, and blurry lines from a privacy perspective mean people get harmed.
How about it's funny because I titled this "Is Monero Traceable," which we talked about, but now we touched on it. We are talking about it, whatever. This is what we're doing. If Zcashers want to jump on in the Q&A, we could hash it out there. But like the dev tax, or I think they even see that as pejorative when you call it a tax. But just this idea that, Zcash is funded that way, and, arguably leads to perhaps a more centralized system of, those that are, controlling this protocol and benefiting from its growth. What's your response to that? Because I do think that's something, right? So like Zcash, yes, great, you're using Zcash. It's private, but are there other, issues that are still lurking there?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I definitely don't want to kind of spend the whole time bashing Zcash, and I think I'm less of a hater of the dev fund or dev tax approach than most people in the Monero community. I think the way that it was done in Zcash isn't optimal, but I think that there is certainly an issue with funding in the free and open source space more broadly, and in the cryptocurrency space as well. When a cryptocurrency is properly decentralized, where all funds do go to miners, there are funding issues. I think with Monero, we've been able to kind of sneak by with the CCS and have done a good job where people are just stepping up and funding things. I still don't think I've ever seen a CCS proposal fail to get funding, which is magnificent. And that goes to show how amazing the Monero community is, because that's all voluntary donations. But I don't think that model is sustainable long term. And there are centralization issues with the CCS model as well. So it's certainly not a silver bullet. But I think that the beauty of the approach that Monero has taken is that it is opt-in from a financial perspective, where if you want to give back to Monero, you can choose to do so. If you don't want to, you aren't harmed, and there's no added inflation against you, because everything's just going to miners who usually have to sell to the open market. It's the same beautiful system that works well for Bitcoin. I think that the idea of a dev fund that goes directly into a pot to be very specifically used for funding development is actually really interesting. And if we could do the selection of how funds are spent and the custody of funds in a decentralized way, I would much prefer that model, honestly, to the CCS model. I think that it would be
some kind of governance
cleaner. Yeah, it gets really tricky. And even if you do some sort of governance, like I think that governance and DAOs are still very much an unsolved problem. Because like even another cryptocurrency that I really appreciate some approaches taken is called Decred. It's one that I contributed to a while in the past and have dove really deeply into. But they have a system like that where there's a certain percentage of every block reward that goes into a pool that's held by multi-sig custodians, but there's a way that users stake funds to actually vote on how things are spent. And it works reasonably well, but they also have the problem where it's a tyranny of the rich, in that there have been many times where votes have been swayed at the last second by whales because they're able to just vote with their wallets and push things through that they want to see. So even that, if you do like a stake-weighted governance system, it has core problems. CCS can have similar problems where if someone puts up a CCS proposal that the community is broadly against, if it gets through that initial stage and gets into funding required, a whale can just come in and fund something and make it happen, which I think is less harmful because it's coming from the whale that wants to fund it rather than coming from a pot that's been filled by block rewards. But there are still issues there. So I think I got very off track with talking about the Zcash dev fund, but broadly speaking, I don't think it's a terrible idea. I just think that the core problem with the Zcash approach is that a lot of the money went into the pockets of people who started Zcash,
right?
And incentivize them to try and build Zcash from a monetary perspective instead of from a protocol perspective. So again, I don't think that there were malicious motives behind that. I think they were very well intentioned, and I think like Zuko, even with the latest licensing debacle with how they're licensing Zcash now, is very well intentioned because he sees the problems with funding in the open source space and is trying to find a solution to it. But I think even though we share a view in where the issues lie, the actual implementation is something that I think is unfortunately incorrect and doesn't work well for its users. But I think like when you're looking at Zcash and Monero, if you're looking for them as only a means of exchange, if you just want to be able to spend privately, that doesn't really matter to you as a Zcash user. But if you're trying to use it as a way to store wealth, it should matter to you. And all of the other pieces of Zcash or Monero come into play if you're looking at them for not just a way to spend and store a little bit of money, but as a way to actually store value. You need to understand, how is consensus reached? How is funding happening? How is protocol development happening? How is security happening? All of those things become much more important if you're actually using it to store wealth long term.
Great response, man. Great response. Yeah, we're gonna have Decred. Somebody from Decred is gonna be at Monerotopia. Actually, they're helping us out with the conference a little bit because they're
nice.
local to.
Who was it?
City. I forget his name. Sunita, what's the guy who's helping us out? Elian.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I know him from back in the day. He probably doesn't remember me. I went by a couple different M's back then, but yeah, he's a good guy.
SethForPrivacy days.
Pre SethForPrivacy days. Yep.
Yeah, man, this is fantastic. I feel like we covered a lot of ground, actually. I mean, I feel like we covered it already, but the real thing I wanted to was that Zuko presentation, but you kind of went over it already, where he was really just adamantly opposed to a decoy system, where he thinks that it's kind of a vital flaw.
And I think if you watch his video,
with the vendors, right, like the attack, right, with it's
that very specific example that is a potential problem within Monero. And I think it's chosen because it's the one example that has some real world merit. Again, there are 0 real world cases of this tracing being used, but that specific attack is something that we've known about for years. We've been trying to solve. It's very, very difficult with a decoy model, just like he says. That is 100% true. But the problem is he extrapolates that into saying that Monero is traceable and Zcash is not, and so Monero is bad. And that ignores the rest of Monero's privacy protocol. It ignores that amounts are hidden and addresses don't exist on chain, which means that in the vast majority of cases, even if the ring signature was completely useless, they couldn't easily trace funds. So it's an oversimplification to be the means to an end. Unfortunately, it's not something I like seeing, and the real thing that we always have to get to the bottom of with looking at different approaches to privacy is we have to spend time in the nuance. We have to spend time in the weeds, because there's just not a simple 2-word answer for if something is perfect or not perfect. Everything has flaws. And while Monero does have that one very specific flaw, something we've known about for a while, it's something that the recent ring size increase from 11 to 16 directly affects and improves. So it's less of an issue now than it used to be. But it is something that's an issue. And if you want to go back, you can look at mentions of this Alice Eve attack from way back when. I mean, Justin, I think Sarang and Surai, I think all talked about the Alice Eve attack in a video for breaking Monero. Must have been 4 years ago now, maybe 5 years ago, a long time ago. So we know this is an attack, but the problem is the solutions cost more than they're worth, until at least very, very recently cost more than they're worth. And the actual real world impact of the problem is extraordinarily minimal. And even if you are that person that's under targeted surveillance, there are ways that you can protect yourself in that specific targeted Alice Eve scenario within Monero. So really just has been something we've known about. We are slowly iterating to improve on. When there's the magic bullet, we'll implement it. And I think that this trustless ZK snarks approach may be that for us down the line, but it's not something that we need to implement today.
And there's relatively simple ways for people to protect themselves against that, right? I mean, you kind of mentioned it earlier, right?
I mean, I'm wary of saying that they're perfect, because there hasn't been a very concerted effort to research how effective the techniques are under targeted attack. But the simple answer is, if you fear that someone will do an Alice Eve attack on you. I mean, I think maybe a good example that's not darknet markets would be if you were selling Bibles in China, and you knew the Chinese government knew that you were selling Bibles, and they wanted a way to prove it in court, which they wouldn't need to prove it in court. It's China, but whatever. If they needed to be able to do that, they would send you Monero to buy a Bible from you. Then when you went to deposit that Monero on an exchange, which I don't think there's Chinese exchanges that are supporting Monero, so this is breaking down quickly. But if you went to do that and they were colluding with the exchange. They were talking to the exchange about every deposit that they got, and they looked at that. They could see that you were the one that did that. And if you did it multiple times specifically, they could see that you were the one that was selling Bibles. If you're using this KYC exchange that has your identity, which that's a whole nother part of the problem that you can solve separately, and that you can use decentralized exchanges. You can use exchanges that don't have identity attached to prevent that piece from being a problem. But even if you don't do that, if when you receive funds, say you sell a Bible, you take those funds and you send them back to yourself 8 hours later, you send them back to yourself 3 days later, you send them back to yourself 12 hours after that, you do it in a random way that's not easily connected to like the times that you're actively responding to comments in your web store or something like that, something that's not easily corroborated with other information. That creates this giant tree of potential branches that are taken by the output that you were sent. And by the time you actually take that output and send it to the exchange, they have no way of tying it back. There is not a direct link at that point anymore between the government agent who bought a Bible from you and the exchange. Instead, they can see that one of the potential paths was that output ended up with them, but they can't even see that output directly ended up with them anymore. So that's generally called sweeping funds, or there's another term for it that I can't think right now, but that's really the approach that can be taken. Again, there's not really concerted research that's been done around that, but that's kind of general consensus, is that would resolve that issue. So if you were under targeted surveillance, sweeping funds to yourself periodically is a way to go ahead and resolve that. And that, as far as we can tell, would resolve that issue. Can't say it's perfect necessarily, but that would at least cast a lot of doubt on any sort of tracing through that. And again, that's only in that very targeted scenario where Eve is on both sides, where they're the ones sending you Monero and the ones receiving Monero immediately after. If you're just using Monero regularly, you do not need to worry about that scenario. You do not need to sweep funds to yourself. It's not something that you need to be concerned with.
Right. It's where you're the vendor and they're attacking you by sending you fake purchases as as the attacker, and then also, like you said, you're on the other side and you're in cahoots with the exchange where they're sending their Monero off, the vendors, sending their Monero off to at some point to whatever, liquidate it. And I would think that would become general knowledge pretty quickly for those that are concerned about that type of thing, right? I mean,
I would think so. I'd be curious to kind of dive into Dread and the darknet and see if there's mentions of that. I haven't done research on that specifically, but that would be curious if that's kind of commonly recommended on like darknet markets or something like that.
We should go, we should post the link to this there. Watch this video before you do anything on the darknet, before you create your you open up your vendor stand down there.
I will add, I'm not condoning criminal activity. just to be clear here, I'm talking about how you can protect yourself against unjust persecution. But yes.
Yeah, they might be selling Bibles on the dark market, man.
They could be. It's a legitimate use case for darknet markets.
Definitely. But yeah, I think that answers it and covers it very well. But that is maybe like the criticism, so is it irresponsible for the Monero community to say they're protecting your privacy, they're a privacy coin, when there is this scenario? Is it irresponsible to be out here promoting Monero when there is some scenario where a dark market vendor can improperly use it?
No.
Right, that's kind of like what the criticism comes down to.
Yeah, and it's a ridiculous claim because, like I've mentioned, I think a few times through our discussion, no privacy tool is perfect. There are always caveats. There are always potential issues. If you look at Zcash, there are potential issues. If you look at Signal from a messaging perspective, there are potential issues. There have been attacks. There are ways where if the person who's in a group with you screenshots the messages, they can share those and no encryption can protect you against that. There are always potential flaws with privacy tools. And as long as we are transparent about those flaws, and as long as we're working to fix those flaws, that's the important thing. And obviously, as long as those flaws aren't critically breaking privacy for every user. And obviously, in the case of Monero, they're not. Monero is providing excellent privacy against dragnet surveillance and good enough privacy against targeted surveillance that we've seen 0 arrests, 0 court cases, 0 mentions of direct tracing through Monero, which speaks for itself that the tool is working. And I use the same litmus test for privacy tools on Bitcoin. When we look at Wasabi Wallet on Bitcoin, there are hundreds of cases that have funds being traced through Wasabi mixing. Chainalysis and other firms like them sell tracing for Wasabi Wallet. When you look at Samurai Wallet, there are 0 instances of arrests made with funds that have been properly sent through Whirlpool. Sorry, we back?
Yeah, yep. All I saw first was you just moving your eyes for a second.
I think I died for a second there. But yeah, all those same things apply. There are always issues. We need to be aware of the issues. We need to talk about the issues. We need to try to solve the issues. But you certainly cannot toss the Monero baby out with the Eve Alice Eve water, if you will.
I love it. Yeah, I think that now would be a good time to jump into the spaces. We could do some Q&A. I'm sure if there's some Zcash people, they could ask us the tough questions. Monero people can, ask Zcash questions. Seth, anything you want to leave the audience with in a general sense?
I don't think so. I mean, just really, I'm thankful for the tool that Monero is for freedom. It's a immensely valuable one. It's one that I use most days. It's one that I will continue to pitch and push, even if other focuses pop up for me. And it's one where I'm extremely thankful for everybody who continues to work on and contribute to Monero. I'm super excited for protocol changes in Monero. I'm super excited for events in Monero like Monerotopia, MoneroCon again this year. It's a really exciting time to be in Monero. So I'm looking forward to the community growing, and it's been great to see lots of people pop up to replace the things that I was doing in the Monero community that I've kind of had to step back from a little bit. So it's encouraging to see those signs, and I'm excited to keep using Monero, excited to keep helping Monero grow, hopefully, and thankful for everybody who's pitching in and helping out.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty active considering we're in a pretty long bear market here, right? I feel like the Monero community
we're used to bear markets,
chugging along, right? It's like nothing changed. We ignore price, nope. Whether it's high or low. It's like so just head down, forward. Man, that's bad news that you might not be making it down there. I guess we'll talk.
I know. I didn't want to spring that live when you mentioned it. I didn't want to just ignore it and move on.
Do a virtual.
At the very least, I want to do virtual if you'll have me. Obviously, I'm not going to force you to do that, but at the very least, I'd love to present virtually. But I'm hoping to make it down. It just might be a kind of hop in, hop out kind of situation if I do.
It's heating up, man. We got a lot of speakers, a lot of. Remember, last year was jam packed.
Yeah.
This year we're doing 2 days, but it's literally just as jam packed. I started with the starter. We're starting. Actually, it's 3 days. We start on that Friday. We're going to start at 6. It was going to be a welcome party, but
nice.
We have so many people we're trying to fit in. We might start doing talks on that evening as well, just so we could spread it out. Because that was intense last year.
It was an exhausting day.
It's going to be an exhausting 3 days. We tried to spread it out, but we just ended up with a lot more speakers. Do you know what your talk might be on? Do you have a...
I think I want to talk about community, actually, and go away from kind of the technical side and kind of focus on the Monero community, kind of the good, bad, and ugly, and talk about how community can help Monero to grow moving forward, and some things that we can do, avoid. I think that'll probably be the focus, just because that's kind of been top of mind with me with how deeply I've been a part of the community for so long. So I think that'll probably be it, but still subject to change. And if a super interesting topic comes up, I'm definitely game to cover that as well.
Yeah, we might have one Zcash related guy giving a talk. Ian Saxter?
Yeah, Sackmeyers or something like that, I think is what he goes by on Twitter.
Sagstetter. He was in charge of their communications at some point.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about, actually.
But I was talking. He might want to do a talk some of these things we were talking about, basically the governance models and comparing Zcashes to
yeah, I think that'd be good. It's always good for us to be exposed to other ideas and approaches and find what works, find what doesn't, and learn from it.
Awesome, man. So let's jump over there. So anybody that's in the spaces, now's the time to request to speak, and we'll get you up. And Seth, if you could just make your way over there, just close this out, and I will see you on the other side. All right. Okay, Seth, I think, is running to the bathroom. He'll jump in here in a second, guys. JW, hold on, let me get you up here. All right. Body, let's get Body up here. Andrew. Nice, we got Andrew up here. We got some Zcashers. JW, what's going on?
Hey, Doug. Hey, Seth. What's going on, boys?
Seth, I think, stepped away for a minute, so yeah, just give him a second. Is he added as a speaker? Yeah, I think he just stepped away. JW, what'd you think, man? What's your take on what you heard?
So, yeah, I appreciate. I listen to you and Seth both. I appreciate Seth's, measured comments, and I think a lot of nuance, which is where this discussion needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
That was an issue I shared with you.
Just testing if y'all can hear me.
Hey, Seth.
And if I can hear you, hopefully everything's working well.
Yes, we got you. Can you hear JW? I hope he can. But go ahead, JW. I think he could hear you.
Yeah. So I think that Andy's appearance, he did what book authors often do, right? Which is sell books, and I don't begrudge him for that. But if you read the book, and you should, both of you should. There's a passage where he's interviewing his protagonist, the IRS guy that's his main guy. I think the one that's at Binance now. And the guy says, chain analysis says they can track Monero. That's bullshit. So he pretty clearly comes out. That's a contrary point to he's kind of you think the book makes the point obviously that Bitcoin is traceable, but it doesn't really dig much into Monero other than referencing the leak of the Monero presentation. So I think that's interesting, and more nuance in the book than there was in the in the sales pitch on Laura's show. But
yeah, that's my understanding as well. And I definitely will read the book, and I wanted to read it and have him on and talk about it. But it makes you wonder too. So why is he leaving that part out? When he's out there publicizing it,
Yeah, well, and the whole kind of the cypherpunk dream is dead was way over the top. But look, here's what I kind of think about things. I'm new to the Zcash community, but I have a lot of respect for Monero, and I would say I own a lot of both, but I don't want to say what I own in case there are feds listening, right? You never know. Let's just say I have respect for both communities, and I think it's regrettable in the past that there's been a lot of negative commentary from both sides, and I think Seth hit on that. What these two communities kind of remind me of, because I respect them both and what they've developed, it really, I keep thinking about my favorite sci-fi show, Counterpart. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but the premise is that this experiment opens up an alternative dimension that at first is exactly the same, but because the two dimensions interact with each other, they start developing a little differently, and those things ripple out. And then two things happen. One is that when counterparts, the people, the copies of each other meet in person, they usually tend to not get along because they're so similar. And then the other interesting thing is that as time goes on and the differences in both universes change, they develop trade and information, a whole economy of trade and information, because they each make different choices across everything going on in the world a little bit differently. And so they have a ton of gains of information from trade. And so there's this economy of information trade between the two worlds. And it feels like that's the story of these two communities, that different design choices were made at the very beginning, but from people working from the same focus of trying to fix Bitcoin's failed promise of anonymity. And Zcash community wanted to get the cryptography perfect, and was willing to sacrifice usability for that. And Monero kind of went to war with what they had, and did continued iterations, continued improvement, as Zcash has done as well. Most of the FUD of both projects, or the critiques, are all based on stuff that's very old, and I hear it from each community going at the other. The critiques of Monero from the Monero traceability paper, very old, very the pre-Ring CT. In the same way, the issues with T-address prominence on the Zcash side are changing very quickly over the last year. with a million ZEC in the shielded pool, and Zcash's anonymity set isn't so much transactional as it is the pool itself. So that's a huge change to that historical issue. So I just feel like that's the case, and I feel like diplomacy, links, trade should be the story of our future, And I feel like it's good that we've got people going over to Monerotopia. I feel like y'all should have people coming over to Zcon, and we should be funding stuff together. ZF and Monero's grants program should be funding projects together. We fund some stuff for Tor. I feel like that's our future. So I don't know if you guys want to help build that. That's why I'm here, dudes. Let's do it.
Love it, man. Love it. Wow, this is what we wanted, right? We wanted to create some bridges today, which I don't think I was doing a great job of it in the talk, but JW, you're doing a fantastic job of it right now. Seth, what's your response to that?
Yeah, good to have you on here, JW. And I've had a lot of good interactions on the past on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I hope that I was a bit even-keeled in my critiques of Zcash, and I think pretty up-to-date in the specific things that I mentioned, but it is definitely something where I don't like the continued negative back and forth between both communities, and it's been fortunate that most of my interactions with the Zcash community have been overwhelmingly negative. So it's kind of tainted the way that I view that, but it's something where I've also had some really good recent interactions with Zcash community members. So it's something where I would love for us to be friends united against a common enemy. And I do think that we have a common enemy of the surveillance state, of surveillance capitalism, and of fixing the things that are broken with Bitcoin and giving people really solid options to preserve their privacy. And to have different approaches to do that. And I think one of the really unique things with Bitcoin, with Zcash and Monero is that because we do have such kind of ideologically different approaches to solving the same problems, we also really can provide some diversity in the sense of protecting users from different things, being resistant to different types of attacks, having kind of an alternative option. Like I love to view Zcash as an option where if for some reason Monero was proven to be totally traceable, but the different approaches taken in Zcash wasn't traceable through whatever that method was, and this is all hypothetical, of course, I would love to view Zcash as kind of a fallback and something that I could use in that adversarial environment. So that's something where I want to see more of that. I think there's a lot of room for us to talk and learn from each other, from the Monero community to learn from the Zcash community and vice versa. And especially on the funding side, I think there's a lot of fascinating things that could be done there. But yeah, thanks for the comments, JW, and looking forward to getting more into the nuance. It's always hard, it's always tricky. I hope it didn't come off as too negative towards Zcash from the top, but happy to get into more details on any of the things that I mentioned and kind of break down my views a little bit more too.
Hey, I'd love it to go into a detail.
Go for it, Andrew.
Sure. First of all, I just want to say I really appreciated your talk, and I'm excited about the bridge building efforts. I learned a lot from the parts about Monero. I'm really interested in ring signatures and the direction that you're all headed in. I think I agree with Zuko broadly that the full anonymity set approach is better, but I like both. I'm really glad Monero exists, and I'm even a fan of the decoy-based ring signature protocol in the direction that it's going. The main part I wanted to push back on and talk a little bit more on into some nuances on the spectrum of options for say optional shielding versus mandatory shielding. I mean, the way that I view it, it's all boils down to client defaults, because even in Monero, the protocol allows you to create viewing keys. So if you wanted to do something like accept Monero and just publish, the whole details of your wallet, you could do that through viewing keys. I think the case is just that, and that's analogous to explicitly using T addresses in Zcash. So, I mean, I think it comes down to client defaults, just in the sense I don't think any Monero wallets particularly make it easy or encourage that, kind of usage case. Like you could figure it out through menus, but it's not encouraged. Whereas, the early Zcash wallets, except since Y Wallet became the most popular one, wouldn't, make it as easy. They would make it easier to get T addresses by default. So, I mean, and I appreciated you mentioning the direction that our wallets have gone. Like Y Wallet now is the predominant wallet. And, the unified addresses thing pretty much makes it more obvious to use Z to Z only now. Yeah, I'm interested in the discussion further. I mean, I see these as like two different nuances, and maybe the last thing I would say before handing it back is, I think the outcome matters. I think it's totally right to credit, the larger usage base right now of Monero as, actual privacy delivered. Count that against the, relative strength of the, shielded pool versus decoys and what that might entail. To the extent the setting user defaults, one set of user defaults maybe leads to more utilization of the privacy mode. That could be, I think it comes down to a threshold, but that's the spectrum the way I view it.
Yeah, I can respond to that a little bit. So from the perspective of comparing view keys to Zcash's T addresses, I think the key difference is that for a very long time, T addresses were the default in mini wallets. Not all wallets, like you mentioned, but mini wallets, T addresses were the default. And they're also the only option when interacting with exchanges. So there are key areas where you don't have even the option of using privacy. You have to reveal information in order to use those tools. Same with hardware wallets broadly as well. Whereas with Monero, view keys are an optional tool for you to reveal information about transactions that happen within your wallet. It's not something that's protocol level. It's not something that you can even, you could technically publish it on chain in TX Extra. That would be a terrible idea, but it is something where you can opt out of privacy. And that is a vital, vital tool. No matter what tool you're building for financial privacy, I think you need the ability to opt out because it allows you to have specific use cases where you can reveal that information. A perfect example is the Monero General Fund, where it's donations that are made and people want to be able to view transparently what's happening there. If you didn't have view keys, it would be a black box. No one would be able to tell what's happening with funds, and it would be very detrimental to the broader Monero community. So there's something where view keys need to exist. They need to be an option, but they're different from T addresses because they're not something that is a core piece of the protocol. They're just a piece of wallet software that you can then publish that key if you want. You can share it with one person, or you can never use it. But it's never a direct option when interacting with a hardware wallet or anything like that. The other piece about client defaults, 100% agree. I've been quietly singing the praises of Zcash since they started to shift more towards private by default. It's something that I've been pushing for a long time. I've talked to Zuko about, talked to other people within the Zcash community, and I'm glad to see that progress. I've been speaking about it. There's an article I've written that's not under my name, but I've written that essentially says that I think that Zcash is an interesting privacy tool now that the defaults in many clients are Z to Z only, and I think that is something that's vital. It's a good step in the right direction. I don't think it's complete because you still have T address usage, you still have leakage when going to exchanges, you still have issues with hardware wallets. And it's not necessarily the default on every client. The reason that I care about protocol defaults over client defaults is that they ensure that no matter what client you're using, you're abiding by a basic set of privacy rules. And that means that if I tell someone you should use Monero, it's privacy preserving, it'll help you, I don't need to know which wallet they select in order to trust that they are getting strong privacy, because the protocol itself enforces that privacy. But if I tell someone you should go use Zcash, it's privacy preserving, it'll help you, depending on which wallet they select, it may or may not provide them privacy. Depending on who they interact with and what wallets they're running, it may or may not provide them privacy. That situation is getting better, but it's not a protocol default. So there will continue to be options where people are revealing privacy, and it's hard as a privacy advocate to recommend it because they may or may not be getting privacy from Zcash depending on many factors. But I am really excited to see that continue to improve. And I'm hopeful that one day Z to Z only will be a protocol default, as it should be. And that will ensure that no matter what client people use, the clients have to abide by consensus rules, and they have to provide privacy by default.
I love the idea that you touched on, like, best practices, basically, like a standard, basically, for what it means to, expose the privacy by default to users. It seems like you said that that's a protocol enforced thing. I don't see how that's a consensus protocol enforced thing.
Yeah, Monero enforces privacy at the consensus level. So in order to build a transaction that actually abides by Monero consensus rules, It has to have ring signatures. It has to have the amount hidden. It has to have stealth addresses used. All of these things have to be done in order to build a transaction that actually passes consensus and can be included in the blockchain.
But I mean, it doesn't prevent you from like just leaking your view key in the same effort or with a tweet at the same time.
No, but again, that's true of any privacy tool. Zcash would be the same. I could give you my seed and you would have full visibility into my wallet. It's the same with Signal, which is a fantastic privacy tool. But if you're the person on the other end, or if I add you into a group chat and you screenshot everything that's sent, the encryption, the privacy is pointless at that point. There are always ways to opt out, whether they're part of the protocol or not. It's the same situation that's happened with with Mempool full RBF in Bitcoin. There were always ways to replace by fee. It's always going to be an option because there's always an out-of-band way to do things. But it's important to set strong protocol defaults to enforce that when you build something that matches consensus, that actually abides by consensus, it does these things in the right way and not leave it up to clients, because clients have to abide by consensus rules. So it's a way to ensure that even if someone is building a really crappy client, they have to build it in a way that's privacy preserving, because otherwise they can't create transactions that can actually be included in blocks.
And I'll let it go after this, but I mean, you're saying you can't keep clients from exposing view keys. To me, that seems like you're acknowledging that both Zcash and Monero, to the same extent, the consensus protocol cannot force them to use privacy, only have it as an option.
No, they're forced to use privacy on chain no matter what. If they expose view keys out of band, it's a separate issue. The same thing could be done with any privacy tool, because there's always out of band ways to expose information. That's an issue because there are always ways to expose information willingly. The problem is that in Zcash, it can be done very easily. It can be a default in clients because transactions that are not privacy preserving still meet consensus within Zcash. But you have to build transactions in a way that are privacy preserving in Monero, and you can choose to use a view key and give that out if you want. That's an important thing that needs to exist in the protocol. And we're improving on the actual granularity you have when you use view keys so that we can limit the amount of information we give out and enable some unique light wallet approaches around that. But it's something where you need that option. And it's not analogous to T addresses in Zcash, because those are still consensus abiding transactions that are transparent. Whereas view keys are something that you have to pass out of band to allow visibility, and it's completely opt-in.
All right, thanks for
Fantastic little debate there, discussion. Gary P, go for it, man.
I think Julian had his hand up first, so I'll let him go, and then I'll speak after, or I'll ask my question
thank
after.
you. Julian, go for it.
Thanks a lot. I hope you can hear me.
We got you.
Nobody comes in. First of all, thanks a lot for the technical background. I kind of like understood it the way before, like in the same way, but it was really, I think, a very good summary of like the trade-offs also between Monero and Zcash. And so, yeah, and like, but the main thing I wanted to say, I think that was also said before in some way, is that I think like the privacy community is super small, and like I would say 99.9% of all cryptocurrency space is like number go up, and no matter what actually. And then there is this big Bitcoin sect, which basically says like, holy Bitcoin, and nobody should do anything else, and like, and everything is all about that only, and no matter whatever Satoshi said or whatever Satoshi did, it's like basically the correct thing, and like you are not allowed to even like talk about alternatives. And so there's a very small community of people who really care for this like true self-sovereignty progress, I would say. And so I think it's a very important step that like we try to not wage too much war, instead like between each other and like between different projects, and just see that like there are different trade-offs, and some of them are like, some of them will, they just exist. Just one comment to what was discussed before. I think regarding the public addresses in Zcash and exchanges, because like if you use it correctly, maybe I understand it wrong or maybe I oversee something, but I would say if you use it correctly, in the sense that you like withdraw from an exchange to some newly created public address, and then you directly shield it and send it to your shielded wallet, basically, then I don't see what additional information leaks this way, because basically the exchange already knows who you are, because it's a KYC exchange, for example, and like they know your additional address, which you only used for one transaction. That's not really useful additional information, right? So yeah, that's all. Thanks a lot.
Seth, you got a response to that?
Yeah, sorry, I was fumbling with my mute buttons. Yeah, I think your point about exchanges is true in that if you withdraw to like a T address and then you immediately shield funds and you don't spend immediately after, there can still be solid privacy there, and that's one of the things that is again good about Zcash. When you do use it properly, it provides very good privacy, and that's not something that I debate or speak against. It's something that I appreciate about Zcash. It's just that if people withdrew to a T address and only used T addresses at that point, or if they left funds in that T address and then they only moved into the shielded pool the moment they needed to spend to another user, there are ways to trace through that due to timing analysis. So it just can cause problems because there is the optionality. But if someone uses things properly, and especially with the defaults that are starting to shield automatically when funds are received to transparent addresses, that situation is certainly getting better. And again, that's where I would love for it to be a protocol default. So no matter what client you use, you can only receive funds to a shielded address and you don't have those other potential issues. But for now, if you're using a good Zcash wallet that shields by default, that uses unified addresses, that does all of these recent improvements in the Zcash protocol, you can gain good privacy even when withdrawing from a KYC exchange. There's always the issues with KYC exchanges of them knowing how much Zcash you have, that you hold Zcash, etc. So even in that case, even with Monero usage, I advise people to avoid KYC exchanges. But having strong privacy once you withdraw is definitely a key benefit and something that's important.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Gary, go ahead, man.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Yeah, Julian already touched on some of the points I made, or mainly the observation that that there's a lot of like little unique clicks going on within people who are advocating for certain coins, especially Bitcoin. There seems to be a very hardcore zealotry going on within that community that turns a lot of people away. And my main thing, I do believe in Monero. I don't really have to believe in it, but that's the great thing about it. And there's a lot of sober-minded people in this community as far as practicality. Not everybody is, just gonna stick with Monero because, they need to preserve their bags at all costs. It seems that the people are much more pragmatic. So my question, not really a question, but just kind of a general thing to put out there is, how can we get privacy and the need for it into the minds of the broader community just in crypto? I'm not trying to onboard people into Web3 or any of that kind of thing. I think that crypto is very difficult for people to use that, outside of custodial wallets if they're not used to it, or not taking the time to really go into all the technical know-hows that are required. But how can we get people to want to have privacy be a priority when they're transacting on chain, which should be a thing? I mean, I see Monero, it's like 24 on market cap. I mean, the coin itself, for what it does and what it provides, I think it should be in at least the top 10. And there's a lot of coins that really provide no utility that are up there, Doge being one of them. But anyway, yeah, just how to bring the community to a wider, get more adoption within the crypto community as a whole for Monero, or just any privacy coin in general, or privacy in general.
The $1 million Doge question. JW, go for it.
Yeah, so to that point, one of the unfortunate events that I think is probably going to awaken crypto users to the need for privacy is going to be look, we've already seen the in the United States, the IRS send John Doe summonses to the exchanges and just do a kind of a data sweep from there for enforcement actions. And they do the come in, amnesty, tell on yourself, pay the fine, that kind of stuff. Given what I've learned on SethForPrivacy show and in a number of venues, it seems like the crypto community, so much of the crypto community is in the DeFi space is just unaware of the information they're leaking. If they're not using VPNs, if they're not. So I think the next thing the IRS is going to do is a similar kind of sweep to try to link ISPs to DeFi transactions. And they're going to come after people that way. And I think that's the next kind of awakening, unfortunately, that is going to lead people to want to learn more about privacy. And so I think we need to be ready for that and have tools ready for them when that happens. I'm trying to do some stuff that on that side of things to teach people how to use these tools and how they interact with law. I'm doing a book about it. I'd love to hawk the book, by the way, on Doug's show and on Seth's show. But I think that's the next big awakening moment is the IRS coming after DeFi, unfortunately.
Very interesting. Yeah, JW would love to have you on when you're ready. We can talk about the book. When is the book coming out?
So it's still being written. So it's going to be a year and a half. But I'd love to just talk about the issues because I think the threat to privacy, even if some of the other issues with securities, commodities, and banking are fixed, and they're not going to be fixed anytime soon, the privacy issues in the IRS threat is just going to keep coming.
And you have a background in like the regulatory side of things, correct?
Yeah, securities, banking law, and accounting, forensic accounting. So the IRS is still pretty dumb, but they've got 80,000 new IRS agents. They've got a crypto specific institute they're setting up to teach them about it. So I think they're coming after DeFi, and I think that's where we need to be ready to protect people and have tools where people can protect themselves by default.
Very good point. Seth, go ahead. Let's hear your response to how we grow privacy coins.
Yeah, I mean, I think two quick things. One of the reasons why I love, again, just privacy by default tools is that you don't need to care about privacy to gain privacy. I think it's one of the most important pieces with building out tools where if you just use the tool for any other reason, if you're just a Monero miner, for instance, you care nothing about privacy, you just want to mine Monero because you have some computers lying around or whatever, you're gaining strong transactional privacy and you're aiding the privacy of other people who are using Monero. So I think the first one is just building tools that work well that also happen to be private by default. Signal, I think, is another great example of that, where I have lots of friends and family who use Signal with me. Actually, all of my friends and family use Signal, and most of them don't care about privacy broadly. But they like Signal because it's like iMessage, but it's cross-platform. And you can do all of the things you can do in iMessage. And obviously, I gain the privacy. I understand it. That's one of the reasons why I push them towards it. But they gain that privacy by default without having to think about it, care about privacy, etc. I think the other one, JW nailed it on the head. Ultimately, most people wake up to the need for privacy when they get burned, when someone they love gets burned, or when they see some major event that shows them that privacy can be a serious issue. And we've had those types of events. We've had the Freedom Convoy in the Bitcoin space. We've had the Tornado Cash sanctions that woke people up to the aggressive stance against privacy that the U.S. government has. And things like that will be catalysts that wake people up. And that's ultimately how most people will wake up. But in the meantime, I think building the tools so that they're easy to use, people can use them without understanding privacy, and then building out resources, education, et cetera, so that when people wake up to the need for privacy and they start to jump down this rabbit hole, it's a very easy, straightforward process. It's not something that's convoluted or technocentric or anything like that.
Good points. Bawdy, what's going on, man?
One of the best quotes that just came out of this whole conversation was Monero. It runs the dark web, but I just use it to sell Bibles in China. So I had, I guess I had two questions for Seth. One of them is regarding Zcash, and one of them is regarding Monero. The Monero question is more complex, so I'll save that for a second. So when I chat with people about Zcash, about the trusted setup, they'll always say, well, they hard forked in Halo, so now that whole problem is fixed. And I've kept pressing them to try and understand this better. And the best I can figure out is that all transactions that happened after the hard fork, the Halo hard fork, ensures that there was no collusion to secretly print coins. But every time that I ask them about, does that fix the problem for all the transactions before the hard fork? Can you guarantee that before the hard fork? I never get a clear yes or no answer. And there's been at least one of the people I talked to, I felt like was connected to the Zcash Foundation or somehow officially part of Zcash. So have you been able to figure that out? I'm working on the assumption right now that it doesn't solve the original problem for the past 4 years, or maybe it's 5 or 6 years now, where you can't guarantee that there was no printed coin. I think Halo only works for after it was forked in, but have you been able to figure that out?
Yeah, so you are right that if there was collusion in the trusted setup and coins were minted, that could have happened before the implementation of Halo 2 and this trustless Zk snarks approach that's now live in the Zcash protocol. The way that they work around that is essentially that when they transition between shielded pools, so when they upgrade the protocol, they do what's called a turnstile, where in order to upgrade your outputs to the latest shielded pool, you go through a turnstile that reveals the coins, makes them transparent, makes the amount transparent at the very least, and then re-shields them in the new shielded pool. And what that allows them to do is to make sure that no more than the expected amount of coins go through into the new shielded pool. The key problems with that are it doesn't prove there was an inflation, and it could mean that just the person who inflated the supply is the first through that turnstile, and other people could have coins left behind. If that had happened, I think it would be likely that we would have heard about it, because ultimately the attacker would have had the most incentive to rush their coins through the turnstile, and then you would have heard people complaining that they couldn't go through the turnstile afterwards, because it wouldn't allow more than the expected amount of coins in circulation through. And as far as I know, that didn't happen, so I would expect that there wasn't actually a collusion and a money printing or inflation issue pre-Halo 2. But that's kind of the approach that they take. So no, there's not guarantees, but they use the turnstile approach to try and at least force supply at that point in time to meet what is expected.
Man, that's very interesting. I wish that the Zcash people had told me that, because that makes sense. It's like, okay, well, if there was collusion, the attacker would have the best incentive to get through the doors first. Or I don't know, maybe they could just stay in the shielded pool and try and cash out that way somehow. So, okay, my other question with Monero is about the Eve Alice Eve attacks. So I've actually had a few friends ask me now where they want to pull coins off an exchange. They want to pull Monero off the exchange, and then they want to send it to another exchange. And so like, well, so okay, I've anonymized my coins now, and the other exchange doesn't know about me. Now, my working assumption is typically that if I'm pulling coins off of any exchange, I just assume they're probably reporting to chain analysis. Probably there's a few of them that don't, like Cake Wallet, for example, although they're not an exchange, they don't work with chain analysis. So that seems like, there's an Eve, Alice, Eve attack that could happen there. And so like, I kind of tell people the same thing, like, okay, if you have a bunch of outputs you pulled from the exchange, at least consolidate them and then churn them a couple times randomly over the course of a week before you send it to the other exchange. Otherwise they'll like almost certainly be able to tie your identity there. Do you have any other ideas or things that people can do when they're going between exchanges like that to better protect their tracks, protect their privacy? At some points, one time with a good friend of mine, I swapped outputs with them so that they could have, the same amount of Monero, just different outputs, so that they would be able to deposit to an exchange and still be anonymous. What kinds of ideas and things can people do to protect themselves when moving from one exchange to another?
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely right that is a potential Eve Alice Eve attack. It is important that both exchanges would have to collude in some way, or that, like you said, they both have to send the data, and it'd have to be the very specific data on the transaction structure, the outputs involved, etc., to chain analysis or the IRS or whatever. That would have to be pooled and then eventually corroborated. But if there is collusion between those two, they can link you between the two. If both are KYC exchanges where you've given you over your ID, it doesn't matter anyways, because you've given up any privacy at that point. They know that you're the same person. So whatever you do in between doesn't really matter at that point. But if, for instance, one is a KYC exchange where your identity is connected, you buy Monero with fiat, you withdraw, and then you send it to some sort of decentralized exchange like BISC or whatever to say you want to swap for Bitcoin. If you do that, like we talked about on the show, like you mentioned, if you just go directly from exchange, wallet, other decentralized exchange, and the person on the other side colludes with the original exchange, they can tie that together. What you mentioned about churning is, like I said, like it's the loosely recommended best practice. There's not concerted research behind it, but that approach is the kind of the general consensus on what can improve things. The only caveat I would say is you said to combine outputs and then churn, when actually that can harm your privacy, because there are ways in which when you combine lots of outputs within Monero, it can give some more statistical certainty to who you are if multiple of those outputs are owned by one person or sent to you by one person. Like if you withdrawn 5 times from an exchange and you have 5 other outputs in your wallet and you make a transaction that includes all 5 of those outputs from the exchange, they know that that's you, and then they can assume that one of the other outputs is yours and the other things. So it's generally best if you're churning to actually sweep individual outputs. So like the individual output that you got from the KYC exchange, receive it to your wallet, you sweep just that specific wallet, which means you need to use a more advanced wallet like Feather Wallet to do that. And you sweep that one individual output to yourself once, twice, 3 times. Like I said, there's no concerted research on how many times is necessary. Probably 2 to 3 times is ideal with random timing intervals between. And you sweep just that one output multiple times. And then you spend funds as you want after that. That's generally the best protection. Again, that only matters if you're specifically being targeted for surveillance. And the simplest approach is just to never touch a KYC exchange. Because if your identity is never linked to your transactions, even if those exchanges corroborate or collaborate and figure out that you're the same entity, they still won't have an identity attached to it. They still won't have any information about other Monero usage that you make. So the most important thing you can do is just not use KYC exchanges. But if you do, then churning individual outputs 2 to 3 times or something like that is generally kind of best practice there.
Last question. Does that change if you intend, so you're coming from a KYC exchange and you're going to a non-KYC exchange and you want to have an anonymous account on that non-KYC exchange? If you were going to send the entire balance of your wallet, would you still recommend churning the individual outputs and then constructing a transaction with all those outputs to send it to the exchange? Or would it be better in that one particular case, if you're going to send your entire balance, to combine all of your outputs first and then churn it?
I generally recommend churning first, but it's definitely a very niche scenario. So it would depend on a lot of factors, but generally you'd want to churn that individual output first, so that the output that you know could be tainted, that could be known from the KYC exchange, has a much broader graph of potential places that it goes. And then if you combine outputs after that, if they don't know about the other outputs that you own in your wallet, it won't really help them at all in actually tracing at that point. But it would be best to churn that potentially tainted output first. One of the other broad recommendations that I didn't mention before is just that if you have funds in Monero that are potentially known, like funds from a KYC exchange, funds from like a public donation address that's tied to your name, I generally, I would recommend segregating those funds from other funds, kind of similar to how in the Bitcoin space people segregate KYC and no KYC funds. For this type of reason, it's much less important in Monero. And again, unless you're expecting targeted surveillance, you don't need to worry about it at all. But it's one of those little things that can help down the line, especially if you have some fear of targeted surveillance now or in the future.
Fantastic. Body, any other follow-up questions, or you good?
No, not for now. Thanks.
D. Martian, what's going on, man?
Hey, just had a question for Seth. I too have been looking at enjoying the improvements for privacy with Zcash and just seeing them go in the right direction. One thing that before was that they had very few transactions that were shielded, and it had a small anonymity set as a result of that on Zcash. And I'm curious if that's been improving with their changes of defaults and wallets, and how much it actually matters for Zcash and Monero.
Yeah, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head for Zcash since the upgrade. And I don't know of a good place to find it. I'm briefly looking for it right now, but I haven't seen a clear place at the moment to actually follow that percentage change after the improvement. I would assume that it's quite a bit better than it was previously, but I don't have hard numbers on that, unfortunately. If anyone from Zcash is around and knows that, I'm definitely all ears. But yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the kind of the hard numbers behind that.
Okay, sorry, I know you don't have all the numbers right on hand, but how much does it really matter as far as privacy goes in terms of having those anonymity sets?
I mean, one of the things that's important to understand about Zcash is that you don't have anonymity sets in the same sense as Monero, in that if you are in the shielded pool and there's not a easily traceable, transparent parent transaction to that, you essentially have the anonymity set of all other transactions ever made in that shielded pool. So you're not as harmed by transparent address usage as you could be in something like Bitcoin, where it's a lot more problematic when people are not using privacy properly, especially if like you're using a privacy tool. I mean, a great example of this is Wasabi Wallet, where there are tons and tons and tons of cases of address reuse within Wasabi Wallet, which harms the privacy of every other user in those mixes and ultimately can lead to direct tracing through Wasabi mixes. That is kind of, it's not even like analogous to Monero. Basically, because Monero uses ring signatures, everyone who makes a transaction helps every other person to gain anonymity because there's a broader set of outputs to draw from at any given time. So you gain better privacy as a whole the more people use Monero. Since you can't use Monero in a transparent way, every time someone uses Monero, you gain privacy. In Zcash, the only real problem is that when people use transparent addresses, they can harm their own privacy, either because they then don't go into the shielded pool, or they do something like they sit all of their funds in transparent addresses, and when they have to make a shielded transaction, they immediately go into the shielded pool and make the transaction. And there have been cases of this being traced directly through in the past with Zcash, because the timing analysis is pretty easy because there are so many less transactions in Zcash than Monero on a regular basis. So that's more the concern there, but it's not necessarily harmful to your privacy. If you're using Zcash properly, if you're using shielded pools only, if you're only transacting to shielded addresses, your privacy isn't directly harmed by people using transparent addresses, even though you have technically a smaller anonymity set. It's very unlikely to matter in the real world.
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining that.
Good stuff, man. Seth, you running out of steam? How you doing?
I'm pretty tired, but I can do a couple more if people have a couple more questions.
Vanessa, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you for continuing to go, Seth, and for the great conversation. I really appreciate it. The question I had was around Zcash and the signing ceremony, and I'm not exactly 100% sure what that entails and how it affects privacy of Zcash, if at all. So, if you know a bit about that, would love to learn some more.
Yeah. So I assume you're talking about the trusted setup, which was I can't remember what they called the ceremony itself, but there was some name for it. And they did a few with the previous versions of Zcash. But basically what that did was that gave them cryptographic material that they could use to instantiate Zcash to start to use that protocol. And that was necessary for the approach to privacy that was taken by Zcash in the early days. It's not necessary anymore. The current version of Zcash after the recent hard fork doesn't require this trusted setup anymore. The risk with the trusted setup was not actually a privacy risk, but it was that if the people who participated in that ceremony colluded and they worked together, and they combined the different pieces of cryptographic material that they had, they could print funds infinitely. There would be no restriction on printing funds, so they could just mint Zcash as much as they wanted. So the issue is actually more of an inflation issue than it is a privacy issue. As far as I know, even if they colluded, they couldn't undo any of the privacy provided by Zcash. It was just an issue of them being able to inflate the supply and to be able to do it in a way that couldn't be detected because of Zcash's privacy properties.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Julian, go ahead, man. You got another comment?
One more remark. Basically, the biggest problem I see with like the transparent addresses, it's similar to like the problem that I see with like transparency in other chains generally, is it gives basically regulators or like regulators a way to basically use something like, I would say, like divide and conquer strategy, in the sense that they say, look, you can have your cryptocurrency. We accept that if you just give up on this one little detail, which is privacy. And I actually heard people argue in that way. And so basically what I would be worried most about is, and I think that this is basically what was also like talked about before, is that like at some point in the future, most transactions on Zcash would be using T addresses, so would not be private. And then at that point, it would be easy to say, like, look, let's not accept like coins anymore, which came from private transactions. If you're like, I don't know, a good exchange or whatever, you can still use Zcash, but you're not allowed to accept coins that have a privacy history. And that would, of course, effectively like basically kill the privacy properties of the protocol, right? Just in a similar fashion as like now funds from Tornado Cash cannot be used anymore on exchanges. And yeah, so yeah, basically that's a worry that I have about unshielded addresses.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it does open that door to an easy way for regulators to pressure users to opt out of privacy. The kind of the devil's advocate would say that the same can be done in Monero, in that if regulators wanted to force Monero users to give a view key over to be able to deposit their Monero or withdraw Monero from an exchange, they could do that. It's something that's possible, but there's a lot more of a technical hurdle. It's more difficult. It's much more difficult for the exchanges themselves to actually keep track of funds at that point. They actually need a lot more information than just view keys. There's a lot more complexity there, but the same type of thing could be done. And ultimately, the solution to that problem is opting out of a broken regulated legacy system where the regulation harms us, the individual user, and does not stop crime. It does not inhibit crime in almost any way. And that's ultimately the way that we beat that brokenness, is that we just opt out of it and we build our own circular and parallel economies that don't allow regulators to stick their boot into our business. And that's the most important thing, but also building protocols that are private by default that make it as hard as possible for regulators to have a reasonable ability to say, hey, if you want to use this, that's fine, but just avoid the privacy piece. And I think that is an important reason why privacy by default matters, but ultimately we have to opt out of that broken system to really beat that.
Fantastic stuff. This is a marathon for you, Seth. Chill, let's finish off with you. How's it going, Chill?
Hello, the enemy of Zcash. How are you?
I'm a bridge builder. I'm not an enemy.
What? You were called an enemy a day ago.
No.
Did that change?
I don't know. We'll find out later. But go ahead, Chill. What do you got?
That was really good, Seth. No, I was agreeing with everything Seth said, and I just think in this age in time, there's no reason to use centralized exchanges anymore. We have local Monero, BISC, Hodl, Agora Desk, and the most easiest I think for users is to go from Bitcoin. You can use Astico vouchers with Blue Wallet and just in Cake Wallet swap it over. You have dexes like Shapeshift with Thorchain. I mean, the world is your oyster at this point. I was hoping Devrick shows up, and so we can make the announcement about the integration he worked on, but I guess he's bugged down. But by the time Monerotopia rolls around, we will have a plug and play solution where even if you're a pastor or a busy nurse or you don't know anything about technology, you'll be able to just click on an app and run a Monero node, have a Monero Explorer, have your own private Bitcoin Pay server with Monero on your own server.
Love it. I cannot wait to see that and help out where I can. Super exciting.
Very cool. Chill.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do a show where you guys can properly talk about it. But yeah, awesome. This is fantastic. I'm so glad we got a good mix in here. Not just Monero people. We got some Zcashers hanging out as well. This is what we wanted. Seth, thank you so much, man. Thanks for taking the time and being so genuine as always, and objective as one could possibly be in their answers. We greatly appreciate your ability to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and loved the Q&A time at the end as well. It's always really good to get really well thought out questions, and definitely thought that was how this went over. So hopefully answers were nuanced enough, and hopefully didn't anger too many people. But yeah, had a really good time walking through this, and the more time that we can spend going through the details of these kinds of discussions, the better, because there's just so much detail and nuance that has to be covered to properly understand the trade-offs in systems like these. So thankful for it. Always good to chat, Doug, and thanks so much for setting this up.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. I'll just shill Monerotopia real quick. I'm sure everybody knows about it already in this room, monerotopia.com. We're holding a Monero conference in May. Monero plus other privacy tech. There'll be a lot of different privacy tech projects participating as well. That's in May in Mexico City. Go to monerotopia.com and grab your tickets. All right, guys. Cheers. Have a good one. Thank you, everybody. Peace out.
Thank you for joining us on this week's episode. We release new episodes every week. You can find and subscribe to our show on YouTube, Odyssey, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to monerotalk.live to subscribe for a full list of places where you can watch and listen. If you want to interact with us, guests, or other podcast listeners, you can follow us on Twitter. And please leave us a review on iTunes. It helps people find the show, and we are always happy to read them. So thanks so much, and we look forward to being back next week.